"You gonna take all day, Pops? Some of us want to actually hit something this century." The voice was sharp and laced with the kind of arrogant impatience that only youth can truly master. It cut through the rhythmic crack of gunfire at the high desert shooting range, a sound so common it had become background noise. But this voice, this specific brand of condescension, made the air feel suddenly still. Kenneth Hall, 83 years old, did not turn. He did not flinch. His hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, remained steady on the rich dark wood of his M1 Garand stock. His back, slightly stooped in a worn canvas jacket, was a wall of indifference to the young man fuming in the shooting lane next to him. A gentle breeze stirred the dust at his feet, carrying the scent of burnt gunpowder and dry sagebrush. He exhaled slowly, a practice as old as the rifle in his hands, his calm eyes fixed on the distant paper target, a wavering silhouette in the shimmering heat. The world narrowed to the front sight post, the target, and the space between. The young man, clad in a tight-fitting shirt with a tactical brand logo, exchanged a look with his friend. They were both in their early 20s, decked out in the latest gear plate carriers without plates, expensive optics on brand-new rifles, and magazine holsters for a war they would never fight. "Seriously, what is that thing? A museum piece?" The friend snickered, loud enough for half the range to hear. The range safety officer, a man named Dylan who couldn't have been older than 30, sauntered over. He had a proprietary air, puffed up by the minimal authority his red vest afforded him. He saw the flashy gear on the young man and the ancient rifle in Kenneth's hands, and made a swift, easy calculation. "Everything all right over here, gentlemen?" Dylan asked, though his eyes were fixed on Kenneth. "Just wondering when the history lesson is over," the first young man said, jerking a thumb toward Kenneth. "This guy's been setting up for one shot for 10 minutes. People are waiting." It was an exaggeration, but the sentiment had begun to ripple down the line. A few other shooters, all of a similar age and disposition, grumbled in agreement. They were here for speed, for noise, for the thrill of sending a torrent of lead downrange. They performed rapid mag changes and tactical reloads they'd learned from online videos, their shots peppering the targets in wide, undisciplined groups. Their sound was a frantic metallic chatter. Kenneth's sound was different. It was a singular resonant boom, followed by a moment of profound silence, and then the musical ping of an en-bloc clip ejecting. It was a rhythm of patience, a cadence of discipline that felt alien on this modern firing line. Dylan cleared his throat, stepping closer to Kenneth. "Sir, with all due respect, the line is getting a bit backed up. We need you to maintain a reasonable rate of fire." Kenneth finished his breath cycle, his finger applying slow, steady pressure to the trigger. The Garand roared, a deep, authoritative sound that momentarily silenced the popping of the other rifles. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, a familiar and comforting impact. He worked the action, his movements economical and fluid, born of a lifetime of practice. He didn't look through the spotting scope. He didn't need to. He knew where the shot went. Only then did he turn his head slightly, his pale blue eyes meeting Dylan's. "I paid for the lane for an hour," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "I'm following all safety regulations. The pace is my own." The calm, unshakable certainty in his tone seemed to irritate Dylan more than any argument would have. It was the calm of a man who had been in situations where the stakes were infinitely higher than a backed-up line at a civilian shooting range. But Dylan couldn't see that. He saw a stubborn old man defying his authority. "That rifle," Dylan said, nodding at the M1 Garand with a look of suspicion. "Is it safe? We don't normally see antiques like that out here. I might need to inspect it." "It's a safe and reliable service rifle," Kenneth replied, his gaze returning to the lane in front of him. He reached into a small canvas bag and produced another 8-round clip, pressing the cartridges into place with a practiced thumb. "Look, old-timer," the first young shooter chimed in again, emboldened by the RSO's support. "This isn't your granddaddy's war. We're running drills here. You're in the way. Why don't you take your relic and go home before you break a hip?" A few of the others chuckled. The humiliation was thick in the air, a palpable force. They saw an old man, slow and obsolete. They saw a rifle that belonged behind glass. They saw a nuisance. Kenneth saw the crisp black circle of the target. He heard the wind. He felt the weight of the stock against his cheek. Their words, their posturing, it was all just static on a frequency he had tuned out long ago. He was there to do one thing, put a small piece of metal precisely where he wanted it to go, over and over again. He fired. Another boom echoed across the desert. Another perfect hole appeared in the dead center of the target, so close to the first that it barely widened the original tier. This silent, irrefutable display of skill only angered the young men more. Their own targets were a mess of scattered hits, a testament to speed over substance. The old man's quiet perfection was an indictment of their noisy failure. "That's it," Dylan said. His face flushed. He stepped forward, placing a hand near Kenneth's rifle. "I'm calling this lane cold. Sir, I'm going to have to insist you pack up your equipment. You're creating a hostile environment." As Dylan's hand reached out, his fingers brushed against the sleeve of Kenneth's canvas jacket. On the shoulder was a small, faded patch. The colors were washed out by decades of sun and wear. The threads frayed around the edges. It was an unassuming little emblem. A downward-pointing sword crossed with an arrowhead, surrounded by a black field. It was meaningless to Dylan and the others. It was just another piece of old junk on an old man. But as Kenneth looked down at the RSO's hand on his arm, the sound of the range faded for a fraction of a second. The bright desert sun became the dappled, humid green of a jungle canopy. The smell of sage and gunpowder was replaced by the scent of damp earth and decay. The ping of his ejecting clip echoed and transformed into the drip of water from a broad leaf onto the steel pot of a helmet. He saw himself, decades younger, face streaked with camouflage paint, holding this very same model of rifle, utterly motionless in a thicket of bamboo. He was waiting. He and his team had been waiting for 3 days. Patience wasn't just a virtue. It was the only thing that kept you alive. The patch on his arm then was crisp and new, a secret symbol for a secret war, a promise of a job that no one would ever know you did. At the far end of the firing line, a young man had been observing the entire exchange. He was lean and wiry, with the kind of focused intensity that seemed to burn off any excess fat or emotion. He wore a plain white t-shirt and a pair of drab camouflage utility trousers. He was a SEAL recruit, on a rare weekend pass from the grueling initial phases of Bud/training. He was here not to show off, but to practice the fundamentals his instructors relentlessly drilled into him: sight alignment, trigger control, breathing. He had noticed the old man earlier. He had seen the economy of motion, the serene focus, and the impossible accuracy. He'd also seen the preening arrogance of the tactical crowd, and the growing disrespect. It coiled in his gut, an anger he was trained to control. He had been taught that true warriors were quiet professionals. They didn't need an audience. The loud ones were almost always compensating for something. The RSO's ultimatum was the final straw. The recruit began to walk slowly down the line, his eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. He wanted to intervene, but he was a trainee, and discipline was hammered into his soul. You don't get involved. You observe. As he got closer, his eyes fell on the faded patch on the old man's jacket. His breath caught in his throat. His heart hammered against his ribs. He stopped dead. He had seen that patch before. Not in person, but in history books, in hushed lectures from legendary instructors at the training compound. It was the insignia of the Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, Max VSOG, the ghosts of the jungle, the grandfathers of every special operations unit that came after. They were the men who did the impossible, who went deep into places that didn't officially exist and from which most did not return. To see that patch in the wild was like seeing a dinosaur. The recruit's hand went instinctively to his phone. He turned away, his back to the scene, and walked quickly toward the parking lot. His fingers were trembling slightly as he scrolled through his contacts. He knew exactly who he had to call. He found the name Master Chief Petty Officer Thorne, his lead instructor, a man who seemed to be carved from granite and fury, who revered the history of naval special warfare with a religious fervor. Thorne answered on the first ring, his voice a bark. "What is it, trainee?" "Master Chief," the recruit said, his own voice low and urgent. "You are not going to believe this. I'm at the civilian range off the interstate. I hope you're practicing your trigger squeeze and not wasting the Navy's time," Thorne growled. "I am, Master Chief, but there's an old-timer here, an old man, and these other guys in the RSO, they're giving him hell trying to kick him out. Not my concern. Deal with it." "Master Chief, wait," the recruit pleaded. "He's wearing a patch. A SOG patch. An original one, I think. And he's shooting an M1 Garand like it's an extension of his own body." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. The recruit could picture Thorne standing ramrod straight, his expression shifting from irritation to disbelief. "Are you certain, trainee?" Thorne's voice was dangerously quiet now. "Yes, Master Chief. Absolutely certain." "What's his name?" "I heard the RSO say it," the recruit said, swallowing hard. "His name is Kenneth Hall." The silence that followed was heavier than anything the recruit had ever known. 100 miles away, on the sun-bleached shores of Coronado, Master Chief Thorne stood over a class of SEAL trainees. They were covered in wet sand, shivering under the relentless California sun, holding heavy logs above their heads. Thorne was a walking storm of controlled aggression, his voice a tool to chip away their weakness and find the warrior within. The phone call was an unwelcome interruption, but the word "sec patch" and the name Kenneth Hall had changed everything. He barked an order at a subordinate instructor to take over the evolution, then turned and strode away from the beach. His usual purposeful walk had become a near run. He went straight to his office, a Spartan room decorated with little more than a few unit plaques and a framed photo of a fallen comrade. He slammed the door, sat at his desk, and typed the name Kenneth Hall into a secure Naval Special Warfare database. The screen flickered, and a file appeared. Most of it was covered in thick black lines of redaction. But what was visible was enough to make the Master Chief's breath catch in his chest. Hall, Kenneth, Sergeant Major, U.S. Army Special Forces. Assignment, Mac V SOG, OP-35. Tours 3. Awards, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star 2 OLC, Purple Heart 4 OLC. And a long list of other commendations, most of them classified. Thorne leaned back in his chair, a low whistle escaping his lips. Kenneth Hall wasn't just a SEC operator. He was one of the originals, one of the legends whose stories were used to scare new recruits straight. He was a name spoken with the kind of reverence reserved for mythological figures, and he was being harassed at a civilian shooting range. Thorne snatched the secure phone from its cradle. "Get me the base commander," he ordered the operator. There was no hesitation. Within seconds, a new voice came on the line. "Captain Miller." "Sir." "Master Chief Thorne. Apologies for the direct call, but we have a situation. A living legend is being publicly humiliated by a group of civilians about 100 miles from here." He relayed the recruit's story quickly and efficiently. The reaction from the base commander was immediate and decisive. "Master Chief, where are you?" "My office, sir. Meet me at the motor pool in 5 minutes. Bring your best men. We're going for a ride." Back at the high desert shooting range, the situation had reached its ugly peak. Dillon, the RSO, felt his authority had been irrevocably challenged. The quiet defiance of the old man had made him look weak in front of the younger shooters, and he was doubling down. "Sir, I am not going to ask you again," Dillon said, his voice tight with anger. "Pack your weapon and leave the premises immediately, or I will call the sheriff and have you removed for trespassing." The smirking young man next to him couldn't resist a final jab. "Yeah, go home and take a nap, Grandpa. Let the real men shoot." For the first time, Kenneth stopped what he was doing and turned to face them fully. His eyes, which had been so calm and focused, now held a glint of something ancient and unyielding. It wasn't anger, it was a profound and weary disappointment. "I paid my fee," he stated, his voice level. "I am following every safety rule. I am a member of this club. I will leave when my hour is up." The finality in his tone sent Dillon over the edge. "That's it. You're done." He fumbled for his own phone, his face red with frustration. "I'm calling the sheriff. We'll have you escorted out of here." Frankly, for an old man who won't listen to reason, maybe a psychiatric evaluation is in order. It was the ultimate insult, the final overreach. But before Dillon could dial the number, a new sound intruded. It started as a low rumble on the distant asphalt road leading to the range, a sound that grew steadily louder, deeper. It wasn't a single car, it was a convoy. Every head on the firing line turned. Cresting the small hill leading to the entrance was a sight that made no sense. 2 black government SUVs followed by a military-grade Humvee, and 2 more SUVs bringing up the rear. They didn't slow for the gate. They rolled through it, kicking up a massive cloud of dust as they pulled into the gravel parking lot. They didn't park in the designated spaces. They formed a swift professional cordon blocking the entrance and exit. The doors flew open in unison. From the vehicles emerged more than a dozen men. They were dressed in full operational camouflage, wearing body armor, helmets with night vision mounts, and rifles held at a low disciplined ready. They moved with a silent, predatory grace that was utterly terrifying. The air crackled with their presence. They fanned out, securing the area, their eyes scanning everything, missing nothing. The arrogant shooters in the RSO were frozen, their mouths hanging open. The entire range, which had been a cacophony of gunfire moments before, fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The only sound was the crunch of tactical boots on gravel and the whisper of the desert wind. 2 figures emerged from the lead SUV and strode toward the firing line. One was a Navy captain, his uniform immaculate, his posture ramrod straight. The other was Master Chief Thorne, his face a mask of cold fury. They walked with a purpose that parted the stunned onlookers like a ship through water. They walked right past Dillon, who looked like he might faint. They didn't even glance at the group of young men who were now trying to make themselves as small as possible. Their destination was the old man in the canvas jacket. They stopped a few feet from Kenneth's shooting lane. Kenneth, for his part, had turned back to his rifle and was methodically beginning to break it down for cleaning, seemingly the only person on the entire range not paralyzed by the sudden appearance of an entire SEAL platoon. The captain cleared his throat, his voice carrying in the silent air. "Mr. Hall? Sir?" Kenneth looked up from his work, his hands still. A flicker of something, perhaps recognition, perhaps just curiosity, passed through his pale blue eyes. The captain's body went rigid. His hand shot up to his brow in the sharpest, most respectful salute he had ever rendered in his life. "Captain Miller, Naval Base Coronado," he announced, his voice ringing with conviction. "It is an absolute honor to meet you, sir." Beside him, Master Chief Thorne snapped his own salute, equally crisp, and behind them, in a single unified motion, every single operator in the platoon snapped to attention and saluted the old man. An entire platoon of America's most elite warriors, standing at attention, their salutes aimed at one man. The young SEAL recruit who had made the call watched from the edge of the parking lot, a wave of overwhelming pride and vindication washing over him. The jaws of the other shooters were on the floor. Dillon, the RSO, was as white as a sheet, his phone forgotten in his hand. Captain Miller, still holding his salute, raised his voice so that everyone present could hear his words clearly. "We received a report, sir. The name Kenneth Hall is not one we take lightly in the United States Navy. We are here to offer you a proper escort wherever you need to go." He then turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the dumbstruck crowd, his eyes lingering for a moment on the RSO and the young men who had been leading the harassment. "For those of you who don't know," the captain's voice boomed, "you are in the presence of Sergeant Major Kenneth Hall, United States Army Special Forces, retired. He was one of the first operators assigned to the Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, MACVVSOG. He paused, letting the name hang in the air. This man ran long-range reconnaissance patrols deep behind enemy lines for 3 tours of duty. He is a recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, 3 silver stars and 5 purple hearts. He is a living legend. The unconventional warfare techniques, the tracking methods, the very principles of silent, lethal professionalism that he and his teammates developed in the jungles of Southeast Asia are the foundation of what we still teach our operators today. You are standing in the presence of greatness." A few people in the crowd slowly began to raise their phones, not to post on social media but to document a moment of living history. The young men who had been so full of mockery now looked at Kenneth with a sense of awe and profound shame. They hadn't just disrespected an old man, they had insulted a titan. Kenneth slowly, deliberately placed his cleaning rag on his workbench. He pushed himself to his feet, his movements a bit stiff. He looked at the line of saluting warriors and gave a slow, tired nod. It was not a return salute. He was a civilian now. It was a simple acknowledgement, a gesture of respect from one generation to another. "At ease, Captain," he said, his voice quiet but carrying. The salutes dropped in unison. Captain Miller turned to face the RSO, his eyes turning to chips of ice. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet menace in his tone was more chilling than any shout. "You were going to call the sheriff on this man?" he asked. "You, a range safety officer, questioned the safety protocols of a man who wrote entire chapters in our operational manuals? We will be having a long conversation with the owner of this establishment about the importance of respecting our nation's heroes. It seems you need a lesson." He then shifted his gaze to the arrogant young shooter, who looked like he was about to be sick. "And you," the captain said, his voice dripping with contempt, "you might want to spend more time on your fundamentals and less time on your mouth. Judging by your target, you couldn't hit the broadside of a barn from the inside. This man can hit a gnat's ass at 500 yards with iron sights. Show some respect." Kenneth placed a gentle hand on the captain's forearm. "They're just kids, Captain," he said softly, "full of noise and vinegar. They don't know any better. That's all." He then looked directly at the young men and the RSO, his expression not of anger but of a teacher addressing a difficult class. "Marksmanship isn't about speed, or noise, or how new your rifle is. It's about patience, control. It's about respect for the tool in your hands, and respect for the target. It's a lesson for the shooting range, and a lesson for life." His simple words of wisdom landed with the weight of a hammer blow. As he spoke, his eyes drifted down to the faded Soage patch on his own sleeve. For a fleeting instant, the scene dissolved. He was 25 again, standing in a sweltering canvas tent lit by a single bare bulb. A young captain, his face grim and proud, was pinning that very patch onto his freshly starched jungle fatigues. "You earned this, Sergeant," the captain had said, his voice a low whisper. "Out there, you and your men are ghosts. The enemy doesn't even know you exist. Most of our own army doesn't know you exist. Wear this with pride, but wear it quietly." The patch had never been a symbol of glory. It was a mark of silent, thankless, and brutally effective duty. The SEALs moved in, not with aggression but with a quiet reverence. They began to help Kenneth pack his gear. One young operator picked up the M1 Garand with the care a priest would afford a holy relic, his gloved fingers tracing the lines of the wooden stock. They packed his canvas bag, folded his shooting mat, and gathered his spent brass. They escorted him not as a subject but as a king, walking with him to his old, slightly rusted pickup truck. The entire convoy of formidable black SUVs waited for him, their engines rumbling softly. The fallout was swift and decisive. The owner of the shooting range, a Marine veteran of the Gulf War, received a call from Captain Miller an hour later. When he heard the story, he was mortified and deeply ashamed. He drove to Kenneth's small house that very evening to deliver a personal, heartfelt apology. Dillon, the RSO, was fired the next morning. In his place, the owner instituted a new policy: mandatory annual training for all staff on military history, with a special focus on recognizing and respecting veterans from all eras. A week later, a new plaque was mounted in the range's front office. It featured a photo of a young Sergeant Major Kenneth Hall in Vietnam, with a brief, powerful history of the Studies and Observations Group. Weeks passed. The seasons began to change. One quiet Tuesday morning, the young man who had been the loudest of Kenneth's tormentors was at a local diner, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up as the bell over the door jingled and saw Kenneth Hall walk in. The old man moved with the same deliberate pace, taking a seat in a booth by the window alone. The young man's heart pounded in his chest. He was terrified, but he knew what he had to do. He left a few bills on his table, stood up and walked over to Kenneth's booth. He stood there for a long moment, hands trembling slightly at his sides. "Mr. Hall, sir," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Kenneth looked up from his menu, his expression unreadable. "I was at the shooting range a few weeks ago," the young man stammered. "I was the one. I was an idiot. A complete idiot. I just wanted to apologize. What you said that day, about patience and respect, I haven't stopped thinking about it. I've been practicing, slowly, focusing on every shot." Kenneth looked at the young man, truly looked at him, and saw not the arrogant boy from the range, but a young man humbled, searching. He gestured with his hand to the empty seat on the other side of the booth. "Sit down, son," Kenneth said, his voice gentle. "Let's get some coffee. Tell me what you've learned." Kenneth Hall's story is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us every day, often in the quietest forms. If you were moved by his story of valor and humility, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more.